Okay, and you guys ready?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's A Month of Service presentation of unauthorized practices of law and how to avoid scams. My name is Nia Murray. I am the programs coordinator with Neighborhood Recovery Community Development Corporation, and we are one of the partners in the A Month of Service collaboration. Also included is the City of Houston's Department of Neighborhoods, and joining us today, we have Ms. Rachel Gutierrez as well as Ms. Cecil Carson. In addition to that, on behalf of our presenting partner with the Houston Bar Association, we have joining us today Mr. Leland De La Garza, as well as Ms. Janet Diaz, who will be providing you all with the information for today about unauthorized practices of law. But also included in the partnership is the Earl Carl Institute, the Texas Legal Services Center, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, Harris Central Appraisal District, and the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office. And together we make up a month of service. And basically what a month of service is the collaboration of all of our organizations. We come together on a monthly basis and offer a variety of different workshops, information, and resources to the community relative to community empowerment, asset building, asset protection, and the maintaining of generational wealth. We know that there are a lot of underserved communities that are out there that do not have access to a lot of information, that do not know where to go for resources, for services, for any kind of assistance, especially legal assistance, civil legal assistance. And we wanted to, try to collaborate and create a larger impact and reach more people by coming together and getting as much information out there to the community as we possibly can. We've been a part of this collaboration together for the past several years. And initially, we started out actually being in one particular community, staying there for an entire month, and then we'd go to another community and provide another month worth of resources or workshops to that particular community until we've kind of made our way around the entire city, which is kind of how we came up with the name A Month of Service. So for those that are just joining us, we want to thank you for coming in and taking the time out to join us this afternoon. For those that have continued to come back for our presentations, we thank you for your continued support and ask that you continue to get the information out to other family members, co-workers, and things of that nature that may also find the information to be beneficial as well. So in addition to information relative to community empowerment, like the legal workshops that we host on the first two Tuesdays of each month. Workshops range from, wills and estate planning, clearing title, foreclosure prevention, taxes, protest and property taxes, evictions, home maintenance, first-time homebuyer education, financial capability, and quite a bit more. So if there are not any workshops that we don't currently offer, then please feel free to reach out to myself or Rachel or Cecil with questions or suggestions for other workshops that we could potentially provide to the community. So again, this is your opportunity to correspond with experts in the field, in the practice of law. This is your opportunity to ask questions that you have. Do know that the information that is presented here today is for educational purposes. It is not to be considered legal advice. However, we do encourage those that are in need of any civil legal assistance to reach out to our legal service partners and also to the presenters if you have some specific questions about your particular situation. In asking your questions, we ask that you try to keep them to be as general as you possibly can so that your personal detail and information is not getting out there for everybody to have access to. As we are recording this session, as well as broadcasting live on our social media platforms, on YouTube, as well as on Facebook, we want to try to protect your privacy as much as we possibly can. So if you are joining us on Zoom today, please feel free to type your question into the chat, or you can unmute yourself at the end of the presentation and ask questions directly of the presenters. If you are joining us on Facebook or on YouTube directly, please feel free to type your question into the comment section, and I will be reading those questions aloud at the end as well. So again, we want to thank you all for joining us, and we are going to move right on into our introductions and into our presentation. So there's a lot of information that's going to be covered here today. You will have the opportunity to go back and review it, and again, to share the information in case there's something that you missed or you wanted to get a little bit more information about, or just to hear it again. You will have that opportunity to do that as well. So Ms. Rachel, let's go ahead and have you introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Nia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Gutierrez. I am a Community Outreach Coordinator with the Department of Neighborhoods, Office of Neighborhood Engagement, alongside Cecile Carlson. She is also one of our new coordinators for the Department of Neighborhood, and she will be actually the Dawn coordinator for the Month of Service program and our Will Clinic. So, but we appreciate you tuning in on behalf of, our Mayor Whitmire, and as well as our Director Sims. We always, we know the importance of providing education and empowerment to residents in order to help them in situations that they may come across. We always say, let's not look at it in a negative way or seek out help when there's a negative problem. It's important to be educated and prepared. So the collective that we have with our partners helps us do so in order to be able to get the correct factual information out there so that you are empowered and you are able to take this information and go take the appropriate matter to address situations that you may come across in your everyday life. This information, whether it's this workshop or other workshops that we offer, maybe perhaps it's not particularly you that it may benefit at this time, but it could be somebody that a family member, a friend, somebody you come across in, your areas of life, where church, grocery store, the gym. So let them know about a month of service and the workshops that we have available. It's free. Where do you go to get free information? Probably somewhere that's not here. So, or probably anywhere else that you couldn't obtain this free information, because we know the cost of seeking assistance can be particularly high depending on what it is. So take advantage of this free resource that we have available for you. But we do appreciate the partners and always our guest speakers. We thank them for volunteering their time to be able to get this information out to you. So thank you again for tuning in, and enjoy the workshop for today.
Cecile, did you want to introduce yourself really quick as well?
Sure. Hello, my name is Cecile Carlson. Like Rachel said, I am the new coordinator, and I will be taking over the month of service, partnering up with Nia and the rest of the team. And welcome to this session. Like Rachel said, there's a lot of really useful information here. So I hope that you guys enjoy today's session.
Okay. I just want to kind of touch on something really quick when Rachel was saying about free information. It's free in the sense that it can cost you if you really don't have the knowledge that you need. So it may be free, but there's a lot of value in free information. So if you don't know what you don't know, then here's an opportunity to know something that you didn't know. So let's go ahead and introduce Mr. Leland de la Garza, who will be providing you all with the information about the unauthorized practice of law and avoiding scams. Mr. Garza, go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So first, I'm very happy to be speaking today to people in Houston to try to spread the knowledge about what the unauthorized practice of law is and how to avoid the unauthorized practice of law. I have been involved with the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee, which is a committee appointed by the Texas Supreme Court for many years, at least 15 years on the state committee, and a total of more than 30 years involved with the state committee and subcommittees. So over the 30 years, I both investigated unauthorized practice of law complaints on behalf of our committee, and I've also litigated complaints, even to the Texas Supreme Court. Over the years, I've had lots of interesting cases and many interesting stories. It's one thing that you'll have no shortage of when we are investigating and litigating these cases, is interesting, personal stories, stories of people who've been taken advantage of, but people who are trying to help, and then trying to tamp down across the state. And Texas is a big state for us to be tamping down on the unauthorized practice of law. So today, what I hope to accomplish through my presentation is to help to educate everyone on what is the unauthorized practice of law so that you can understand it. Also understand who is the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee, what does the committee do, and what are the tools available to it to try to fight the unauthorized practice of law. I'm going to talk about types of cases of complaints involving the unauthorized practice of law, where those complaints have gone, what the results have been, and at the end, give you a little information about where, if you are seeing the unauthorized practice of law and you want to do something about it, where do you go? Where do you make that complaint? Today, I'm very fortunate to be joined by another member of our state committee, Janet Diaz. Ms. Diaz is with the company called DB8 Legal Strategies in Houston. The state committee, of which we are members of, is comprised of 9 members appointed by the Texas Supreme Court. 6 of them are lawyers. That's me. I'm one of them. And then we have 3, including Janet Diaz, who are non-lawyers. And the reason for having the non-lawyers and the lawyers on this is so that there's balance, so that the non-lawyers can add sort of the non-lawyer mental perspective about UPL and about what do we do to protect the public against UPL. I think the lawyers view the contributions of the non-lawyers as being very valuable because they give us another way of looking at things, an insight that sometimes we're just missing because we're all like the law, the facts, and we're kind of thinking like lawyers. But the reality is we need to take off the lawyer hat sometimes in making important decisions about what are we going to do with some of these cases where we're going to file suits against people. We want to make sure we can win them. We want to make sure that we're righteous in the pursuit of that case, and that ultimately we're setting the right direction for the state of Texas when it comes to the unauthorized practice of law. And that's especially important because we are a representative of the Texas Supreme Court. Our committee is a judicial agency, so we're considered to be an arm of the Texas Supreme Court, but the court has to be careful. You know, they treat us as somebody that we know you're out there, we know you exist, and we know you're doing our work, but don't talk to us about everything you do, because one day one of our cases might percolate all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court, as it occasionally does, and they might have to decide. So with that, what I'd like to do is to begin a PowerPoint presentation that will, I think, help this presentation that I'm about to make. If during this presentation you have a question, feel free to include your questions in the chat, or Nia, however you are gathering any questions, and we can certainly cover those at the end. If Nia or any moderator wants to present to me a question while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me. I mean, if somebody's got something that sounds like a great point that we just need to cover right now, I'm happy to do it. Okay. So with that, let me begin the presentation. So I explained to you previously what we're going to be talking about, which is understanding it, recognizing it, and avoiding it. In this presentation, I'm going to be using the short term of UPL, meaning the unauthorized practice of law. Sometimes I refer to the UPL committee. That's really the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee appointed by the Texas Supreme Court. So I'm going to tell you that the source of what is the practice of law is found in both statutes and case law. It's also found in some rules that the Texas Supreme Court has adopted. And so there are a number of different definitions of what is the practice of law. Ultimately, what the statutes say and what the courts say is the practice of law is whatever the court says. This is the Texas Supreme Court. Whatever they say the practice of law is, that's what the practice of law is. But our Texas legislature has decided that they'd like to have a little say on that. And so they enacted Section 81.101 of the Texas Government Code, And in Section A of that code, the legislature attempted to define the practice of law. What they're doing is they're giving us some categorical examples there. And for example, they give us the example of preparation of a pleading or their document incident to an action or special proceeding. Think lawsuit, arbitration, or the management of the action or the proceeding on behalf of a client before a judge in court. Think a lawyer stands up in court and speaks on behalf of the client, makes arguments about the law and the facts, makes decisions about whether to file the lawsuit, what the pleading should be, things like that. And then it continues on, as well as service rendered out of court. Of course, not every service that a lawyer does is at the courthouse. A lot of services, especially today, are rendered outside, whether they be, talking to the client, giving legal advice about options, right? The client may have a legal problem and they say, what do I do? And then when you tell them what to do, that is the practice of law, because that's the management of an action. And then, of course, we now have a lot of remote hearings and remote depositions. So there's a lot of things happening outside of the courthouse. This statute deals with that. And it continues on to say, including, so now we're going even broader. The statute says, including the giving of advice or the rendering of any service requiring the use of legal skill or knowledge. If we stop right there, so giving of legal advice or rendering of services, what do lawyers do on a day-to-day basis? They talk to the clients, aka the legal advice part. They do work like they're writing letters, they're writing pleadings, they're writing briefs, and that's the rendering of services. They may attend arbitration. They may attend a mediation or what's called a settlement conference that involves a neutral third party. Those are examples of those kinds of things. And then the statute, not content to give you just the general outlines that were stated above, says such as preparing a will, a contract, or other instrument, the legal effect of which under the facts and conclusions involved must be carefully determined. What's more important in that sentence is the last part. The legal effect of which under the facts and conclusions involved must be carefully determined, because that's the most expansive statement of what is the practice of law. It's anything that the legal effect of which under the facts and circumstances involved must be carefully determined, and carefully determined from a legal perspective, obviously. So the courts in cases that have interpreted this statute have interpreted it very broadly and have included in the definition of the practice of law expressed, that would be overt practicing, so that would be overtly giving legal advice. But you can imagine a scenario where there would be implied legal advice. So if the lawyer tells you, I think that we should settle, but doesn't say why, there's implied in that, there's some legal reasons why. So that's implied legal advice. And then, so you have both expressed and implied. So the courts have applied an extremely broad description of what is a practice of law. The cornerstone of all that, though, is this requires somebody with specialized legal knowledge, legal skill, or legal experience to consider the facts and the law and make a careful determination of what to do on behalf of that client. Now, that statute gives you the first definition of what is a practice of law, but there are others. So let me continue on. The statute tells you in Section B what that it's not exclusive and does not deprive the judicial branch of the power and authority to determine what constitutes a practice of law. And that's what the courts have said as well. Supreme Court of Texas says we ultimately decide what is the practice of law. So the legislature there was trying to say, we're not trying to cabin you into just that, even though that's an extremely broad statement. So we know now that the courts are ultimately going to say, what is a practice of law? Then the statute says a little carve out, what it does not include. This section right here, interestingly, this is a historical fact, is the result of a win by the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee in a federal lawsuit where the UPL committee sought to enjoin a company from providing legal advice and forums on the internet. And we got an injunction out of a federal court. In response to that, the Texas legislature was lobbied. So we have special interests involved here. Special interest said, well, wait a second. If it's not addressing a specific factual situation, it's just more like general advice, that shouldn't be the practice of law. And so the legislature enacted this statute that says it does not include the creation or the sale or publication by means of the internet or written materials or form books or computer software or other products if, and this is the carve out, if the products clearly and conspicuously state that the products are not a substitute for the advice of an attorney. Next time you're at the bookstore, when you're looking at that legal form book, look at the cover page after the cover of the book, or look at the last page. I guarantee you're going to see that if it's a form book, because that's how those publishers of forms are able to sell those forms in light of the broad definition within the statute. Now, the last sentence of this statute says that this does not authorize the use of products in violation of Chapter 83. So what is Chapter 83? Well, Chapter 83 is another statute that helps to define what is a practice of law. So we have definitions in the statute, in the case law, and then we have some ethical rules that apply to lawyers. We have some rules that apply to new lawyers, the rules governing admission of new lawyers in Texas. So various places, but I think you can already see that generally the practice of law is broadly defined to mean providing some legal advice or some legal service where you have to consider the facts of the law carefully and make a determination on the specific legal rights of this particular person. All right, so now we know what the practice of law is. Now the question is, in getting to what is the unauthorized practice, you got to figure out who can practice law. So let's take a look at that. We go to a statute. The statute is section 81.102 of the Government Code, and that statute provides that a person may not practice law in this state unless a person is a member of the state bar. Okay, what does member of the state bar mean? Because, you know, we have the Texas Supreme Court that issues law licenses. If you ever go into a lawyer's office, many of them, not all of them, I don't even have one up anymore, many of them will have their law license on the wall. It's kind of like when you go into a doctor's office and you want to see that license. You want to know that's not a quack, that's a real licensed and hopefully board certified doctor. You go into a law office and you're going to see that license. So the Texas Supreme Court issues a license to practice law. But to get that license, you have to be a member of the State Bar of Texas. So the State Bar is a membership organization that is funded by the dues paid by the lawyers. And so really it's two steps. You become a member of the State Bar and you got to get your law license from the Supreme Court. Then it says the Supreme Court may promulgate rules prescribing the procedure for limited practice of law. And then it gives some examples of that. Supreme Court has promulgated rules for the limited practice by a variety of people. And in fact, most recently is in the process of promulgating rules that permit certain paralegals and administrative type people to engage in a very specific narrow practice of law, but they have to be licensed and they have to go through some educational and training requirements. They have to have their character and fitness reviewed by the State Bar as well, all intended to make sure that they're not going to take advantage and they are actually qualified to give legal help to people. So what are those examples? The statute says attorneys licensed in other jurisdictions, bona fide law students, unlicensed graduate students that are attending or have attended a school approved by the Supreme Court. For example, when I went to law school, I actually tried a case while I was in law school. And the only way that I got to do that was I held a student bar license. And so that is the carve out that I was able to use a long time ago to try my first case. So there are a number of those kinds of exceptions, but generally a person's got to be a member of the State Bar. The statutes only take you so far. And ultimately, if you want to know what the complete law of a state is, you've got to look at the statutes, but then you got to look at the cases that interpret the statutes and that apply what's called the common law. And the common law is the law that exists outside of the statutes, but there's a need for it. And the courts say, okay, here are the rules. The courts create, claims that you can assert. They recognize rights, legal rights. And so the courts have approved a whole series of exceptions to the general rule about you got to be a member of the state bar. One, of course, the obvious one, y'all probably know this one, is pro se litigants. A pro se litigant is you are representing yourself. You stand up in court, say, Judge, I don't have a lawyer. I'll represent myself. In almost every court, the court will say, go ahead, that's fine. That does not work if you are a corporate entity. If you're a corporate entity, then you have to have a lawyer. But if you are an individual, a natural person, you can represent yourself. In-house corporate counsel. Now we have a rule that the Supreme Court promulgated that permits in-house corporate counsel who are not members of the Texas bar to actually do legal work. But they're doing work only for their corporate employer. They can't do work for their nephew or a friend. They've got to be doing it for their corporate employer. Another one would be the federal practice. So the system of laws that we have in the United States is one where we have laws at the federal level and we have laws at the state level. So at the federal level, you have federal courts, you have federal laws. At the state level, you have the same thing, but we just divide them up. The federal laws govern the interaction of states and people within states. They govern specific, areas that have been carved out in our Constitution and delegated to the federal government. Everything remaining goes to the state government. And so the examples of a federal practice would be some lawyer who says, I can only help you with a patent lawsuit. No, there's no state patent courts. That's in the federal system. Or I can only help you with a federal employment type of claim. I'm not going to talk about the state laws. I'm not going to talk about the common laws of Texas, but only this federal statute. And that would be a federal practice. It's a hard one to sell because many times there's a great interplay between the federal law and the state law. And fact patterns many times bleed over across. So it's hard to maintain that distinction, but we face that in a number of cases. And that is an exception if properly, if somebody stays within the boundaries of the federal practice. Evictions and JP court cases, the rules in Texas are generally that a non-lawyer can assist somebody in a JP case, especially an eviction case. The rules are spelled out in the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure and statutes that govern the practice before the JP courts and handling cases and eviction cases. Jailhouse lawyers, that's an interesting one. The recognition that jailhouse lawyers have some rights to represent their fellow inmate comes out of the federal constitutional amendments. And we don't see that very often, but sometimes somebody will say, well, I have the right to help my brothers at the jailhouse write their petitions to get out of jail. And so that exception has been recognized. Pro hoc vice is an exception where somebody from another state is given permission to appear in this state. But they have to apply for that permission with the court, and they have to pay a fee to the state to get that special permission. They have to get a certificate, so that's one. Public insurance adjusters can help people to resolve claims. You have to be careful, though, that they're public insurance adjusters, not private insurance adjusters. And then, of course, the administrative agencies, both federal and state, decide who can help who in appearing before their agency. And so historically, if an administrative agency permits a non-lawyer, and normally in the rules, to appear on behalf of somebody, then we recognize that, and that's not going to be the unauthorized practice of law. Many times I'll hear people say, but there's a need, it's not being met. That's a big deal in Texas right now. The Supreme Court is trying to take steps to make legal services more available, especially for people that are impoverished, that cannot afford lawyers. And frankly, it's become so expensive. Most people, normal people, can't afford a lawyer. So the Texas Supreme Court is trying to help that. But the fact that you need a lawyer and you can't find a lawyer is not an exception. So if you're thinking, this is an unmet need, so business opportunity, let me go into that field. No, that's not an exception, and that is something we hear all the time, and it's rejected by the courts. And the UPO committee is not going to slow down because of that problem. All right, so now we've identified, what is a practice of law, who can practice law. Now we should talk about how can you tell, right? I mean, you're talking to somebody and they sound smart and they're saying all the right legal things. They're using the legal catchphrases, but you can't tell anymore. Is this person really authorized to do so? First thing you can do is you can look them up. On screen, you see that we typed up texasbar.com. So if you go www.texasbar.com, you'll see that there's a feature on that. This is the State Bar of Texas website called Find a Lawyer. In fact, if you just Google Find a Lawyer Texas, you'll go straight to that. And then you can enter that person's name and then look at the history, and you can tell, is the person licensed and are they current? Sometimes you'll see that they are suspended, or you'll see that they've been disbarred. Disbarred means they can't practice law anymore until their license is, renewed, which typically doesn't happen. Normally, you get disbarred, that's it, you're done. Could be suspended. They have a nice green and red dot, like a button. So if it's green, it's good. That's a good lawyer. If it's red, stop. You need to look more. So that's a great way to do it. You can always ask for the bar number, and then you can look them up with the bar number. But be careful that the state bar actually gives out numbers. They're kind of like bar numbers to people that are not licensed if they subscribe to the magazine. So that's kind of crazy. I've seen this where you subscribe to the Texas Bar Journal, you get a bar number. That is not the official bar number. But you could get the bar number, and then you could use that on Find a Lawyer to look them up. You could also do some Google searching and see what their website shows, whether or not they're saying they graduated from a law school and they're a member of a official bar association. Normally, it's a state bar association. So, don't be fooled by other bar-looking professional affiliations. It would be like State Bar of Texas, State Bar of New Mexico, those kinds of things. And then you could also look at the way that they're communicating with you, whether or not it's a professional manner. I will say that, however, I've run across some very professional looking people that are just mimicking. They're just acting like they are a lawyer because they've seen what lawyers do, and they think, wow, if I act like that, then maybe I could make some good money. There's some TV shows about that. That's not looking good, wearing a good suit, does not qualify them to practice law. Okay, I want to talk now that we know who can do it, I want to talk about what is the unauthorized practice of law and give you some examples of that. So the unauthorized practice of law, or UPL, occurs when a person is not licensed to practice law and they're providing the legal services and advice, what we call the practice of law. And you might be asking yourself, well, what difference does it make if somebody engages in the unauthorized practice of law? Well, the answer is that for the person that's doing it, there's some pretty profound consequences. Number one, they might get sued. They might get sued by the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee. There are some other bodies that might sue them depending upon what they're doing. Could be the Texas Attorney General. It could be the Federal Trade Commission. It could be the Department of Justice if it involves immigration unauthorized practice of law. There are some instances where a certain type of unauthorized practice of law, which I'm going to show you in a second, could be a crime, an actual crime. We have, as the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee, made referrals of unauthorized practice of law cases to district attorneys that resulted in people going to jail. So it could be a very serious thing that could result in jail time or fines. We have sometimes entered into agreements where somebody pays large fines because they have been enjoined and then they still did it. I'm thinking of one particular case where a fellow was licensed, said he was licensed in the Middle East, and he took that license and he got admitted to a federal court on the Eastern Seaboard. And then he used that to get admitted to a federal court in the Northern District of Texas. And then he used that to convince everybody that he's real. And then he started hiring lawyers and operating what looked like a law firm. We kind of unraveled the whole thing, and everything was tied back to licensure in the Middle East, which frankly may not be good enough for our purposes. But he wasn't. So everything started collapsing after that. And then ultimately, we secured fines of $365,000 against him. And one of the most creative examples of justice that I've ever seen was we ended up reaching an agreement with him that we would not collect our fines of $365,000 if he would leave the state of Texas and never come back. And he did. And he's been gone ever since. That is a very good way to solve a problem. This fellow is not going to be committing the unauthorized practice of law. But for him, engaging in the UPL cost him a lot of money, a lot of trouble, and ultimately he had to leave the state. It can also cause a lot of damage to the people that are receiving the services. The damages are in both sometimes liberty, like you're getting people who are writing your appeals in a criminal case or your petitions to get out of jail, and they don't do it right because they're not properly trained, and you lose. And so you lost your appellate right. You only get it once. You lost it. You're there. And these people are sitting in jail because somebody wasn't qualified to do the work. And then the other thing is they took all the money. The person and their family only had so much money to pursue this appeal. And, they worked hard and they saved up $10, $20, $30,000, and they gave it to this non-lawyer. He blew it. The appeal is lost. There's no more money. That's it. That person is done. In immigration cases, it can be profound because you end up losing your right to remain in the United States. And frequently you'll see Hispanic families, this is what we see the most of, is they'll save up a lot of money. They'll give it to the non-lawyer to, pursue the paperwork, to file the paperwork, to change the legal status to be in the United States. They'll blow it. And the next thing you know, they have no more money for an immigration lawyer, and the immigration process is complete, and now they're being deported. So those are very serious consequences. Obviously, other examples could be that the persons are just doing it wrong. Sometimes we have people that are involved in divorce proceedings, and people are losing their children because they don't have a real lawyer. They're losing property, retirement benefits. They're being saddled with liabilities that they just didn't understand. And so there's just a whole host of examples of where the UPL can have really, really bad consequences for the people that are being subjected to it. Ultimately, one thing it does do is it causes a loss of trust and confidence in our legal system. So if you saved up your money, you gave it to somebody you thought was a lawyer, sounded like a lawyer, but it wasn't a lawyer, you're not going to trust the legal profession anymore. You might think, okay, now I blew it with a non-lawyer. Maybe I go to the lawyer and I put all my trust in the lawyer. By that point, your sense of confidence in the whole legal system is blown, because how could the legal system allow somebody like this to exist? Which takes us right to the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee. I mean, we exist to try to put a stop to this. We have two statutory charges. The first one is to eliminate the unauthorized practice of law in the state of Texas. The second one is to inform the Supreme Court and the state bar on the status of the unauthorized practice of law in the state of Texas. That's our job, is to stop this. And we do that through the investigation of complaints. I'll tell you how to make the complaints, how that process works. Then the litigation of those, where we seek injunctions to stop them. And then the contempt process, where we try to put people in jail if they don't stop it after they've been enjoined. We make referrals to criminal authorities as well. So, we're trying to put a stop to this, but if we don't do it, it harms a lot of people and it undermines our legal system. And that's why this is such an important thing. So let me let me take you to another statute. Earlier, you probably saw there was a reference to this statute, does not invalidate Section 83 of the Government Code. So there are certain statutes that are very specific. The other one I told you about, 81.101, is very general. This statute says that non-lawyers may not charge or receive a fee for preparing real estate instruments. That's a criminal statute. If you do that, that's a crime, and that can result in jail time. Another example, Section 38.122 of the Penal Code prohibits a person with an intent to obtain an economic benefit from falsely holding himself or herself out as a lawyer. That doesn't happen as often as you might think. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, I think the unauthorized practice of law must be when somebody pretends they're a lawyer, but they're not. That's not really most of the cases are somebody is doing things that involve the practice of law, but they're not necessarily saying they're a lawyer. In fact, they might be saying, I'm not a lawyer. So they think, I'm not engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. I just told you, I'm not a lawyer. But that doesn't get someone out of trouble. That just means that they're being at least honest that they're not a lawyer, but they're still engaged in the practice of law, which is prohibited. But if you tell somebody I'm a lawyer and you're doing it for a fee, that's a crime. That will get jail time. Also, Section 38.123 of the Penal Code prohibits a person with an intent to obtain an economic benefit, so think for money, to contract with a person to represent them with regard to their personal injury claims or property damage claims, or advising persons with regard to the settlement of claims for personal injury or property damage. That's in the Penal Code, and so therefore that's a crime, and that will earn jail time as well. I told you about some of the other rules, DR 505, which is one of the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct, which applies to lawyers. So we have our own rules. The Supreme Court says the lawyers have to follow these rules. So lawyers have to not aid a non-lawyer in committing UPL and not engage in UPL in another jurisdiction. So as a lawyer, I can't engage in UPL here in the state of Texas. I'm a lawyer, I'm licensed. But what if I go to another state and I practice where I don't have a license? That would be the unauthorized practice of law in another state. That would get me in trouble with the Supreme Court. And what is this aiding and abetting the non-lawyer in committing UPL? A good example of that would be if a lawyer hires a paralegal, but then does not properly supervise the paralegal, or the lawyer utilizes the services of a runner to go get cases, and that runner is giving information back and forth. That is aiding and abetting a non-lawyer in committing UPL. That'll get a person in trouble. And when I say get in trouble, that's the stuff that gets lawyers disbarred. So the Supreme Court has a commission on lawyer discipline that investigates lawyers when they engage in acts that are bad, that violate these ethical rules, and they bring lawsuits to disbar lawyers. And so, this is another example of a very, very serious consequence of engaging in UPL. So what we've seen so far is that UPL can hurt the person that is doing it. It can hurt the person that is receiving it. And to the extent that a lawyer is helping or committing it himself, it can hurt that lawyer to the point of that lawyer may not be a lawyer for much longer. So these are very, very important issues with lots of big consequences. All right. I'm going to talk about federal limitations for a second. I've been talking about primarily state law. So we're talking about the laws of Texas. But we have all these other federal laws, including the U.S. Constitution. As a result of constitutional amendments, there's case law that recognizes that organizations that promote the interest of people generally, such as the NAACP, can advise persons on their rights that they've been violated and then recommend attorneys. The NAACP can't be, acting as a law firm or a lawyer, but they can do certain things And that's been recognized in a series of Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court cases. I told you about the federal exception. That was recognized by a case called Sperry versus the Florida Bar Association, which was a United States Supreme Court case involving a lawyer who opened up an office for the practice of law on that proverbial Main Street in Florida, in Miami, Florida. And the Florida bar said, "Hey, you're not licensed in Florida." And he said, "I'm only doing patent work." And the case wound up going all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you cannot tell a lawyer that he cannot engage in a federal patent practice just because he has his office in your state. So that's an example of a federal only practice. And then there are Supreme Court opinions that deal with unions, another organization where people band together to talk about matters of common interest, that they can advise their members about their rights, and again, recommend that they secure an attorney to protect their constitutional rights. So typically, when in the state of Texas, we don't deal very much with these federal issues. I'd say I might get 1 or 2 out of 400 or 500 complaints a year that we actually have to consider what the federal limitations are on our authority. So who's engaging in all this? What are the examples of this? So we've gone over what it is and sort of the framework of it all, but now we should talk about the actual examples. The biggest category of UPL complaints that we receive at the UPL committee right now is regarding immigration services. And that's because it's a big area of need. And there are a lot of people who are opening up shops in poor areas where they will advertise, and they'll have their ads in the equivalent of the green pages. It used to be the green pages, but I don't know where they put them now. But they put it on. I've seen them on the internet. I've seen them in newspapers. I've seen them on storefronts, and they're advertising. We can help you get your visa. We can help you with your immigration status. And while the immigration courts permit certain non-lawyers to represent natural persons before it, most of these shops, they're not coming under those guidelines. They're just doing it for money. They just figured out, hey, all I have to do is get these forms that I can download from the immigration website, and then I just get people to fill them out, and I file them, and I take $1,000 or $2,000. What a great business! But then they don't follow through. They're non-responsive. They don't know what they're doing. They just filed a form and hope for the best. So we get a lot of those types of complaints. We also get complaints about document preparation services and also notario publicos. So in Hispanic countries, the phrase notario publico means something different than it means here. People in the Hispanic and Latin countries go to those people and view them as almost being lawyers. They have certain rights to provide services that would be of a legal nature that they would not have the right to do here. So it creates confusion. And so we get a lot of complaints about people that went to a notario publico, got legal services, and then it didn't work out, whether it was divorce, a will, a lien, a car title transfer. It just didn't work out for them, and so they make their complaint. Occasionally we'll have people who are actually going to court and trying to represent people in court. Now, that's a dangerous thing, because you've got lawyers and judges at the courthouse who can spot a non-lawyer from a mile away. And so what these people try to do a lot of times is they'll prepare all the pleadings. They'll take them all the way to the front door. They might even take them into the area right up to security. And they say, now go to the second floor. They'll call your case, go in there and tell the judge. Well, that's, of course, not very good planning and not good advice, because the judge is not going to understand what it is that you're trying to say, because you can't say more than what's on whatever script they gave you. And sometimes they'll send in a corporate entity, and the judge will shut that down in a heartbeat. Judge will ask, are you a lawyer? No. Then you're trying to represent a corporate entity? Yes. All right. You need to close your mouth, sit down, and don't say another word until this hearing's over with, because you cannot speak on behalf of that corporate entity. They shut them down quick. And so, that's very disheartening when you paid money and how you can't complete what you were trying to complete. Um, what's a dead giveaway? How can you tell? So we call these the red flags. Lawyers don't make promises of guaranteed outcomes. If anybody guarantees an outcome, that's pretty good indication that is not a real lawyer. They can't show you or won't show you their credentials. They won't show you their diploma. They won't show you their law license. They won't give you a bar number. Those are pretty big red flags that you should be alerted to. Then also, one of the reasons that people are able to get away with this is they say, lawyers are expensive. And that if you went to court, the lawyer would charge you, just make an example, $5,000. I'll do it for $500, right? That goes back to, like everybody's mother's rule. If it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Don't do it. Don't fall for that. Anybody who's offering unusually low fees is not a licensed lawyer, because most lawyers have expenses. They probably have malpractice insurance. They have an office somewhere. They have a secretary. They might have other people. They pay taxes. There's expenses that cause those fees to be what they are. So you should look out for those things. Let me give you some examples of some of the scams that I've dealt with in the 30 years I've been with the UPL committee. I personally have litigated some of these immigration fraud cases. And one of the cases that stands out was a family raised, $18,000, gave that $18,000 to one of these immigration shops, a storefront shop. They filed the papers with the Immigration Service, and they didn't do it right. They didn't complete it right. And then they didn't follow up. And the client kept on inquiring, what's the status? We're working on it. What's the status? We're waiting for their ruling. What's the status? Let me check on it. Nothing but delay, delay, delay. What they're really trying to do is they're just trying to make you go away until, they don't hear from you anymore, and they get to keep your $18,000. In this case, that's exactly what they did. But the person's petition for change in immigration status was denied. So the $18,000 was gone. No more money to pay for a real lawyer. And actually, the case was referred to us by a real lawyer who said, look, they came to me. I can't do anything. It's too late. They don't have any money also. I can't help them. So the guy made a complaint with us. And we ended up filing a lawsuit, getting an injunction to stop that shop from operating like that anymore. So that's a great example of immigration fraud. On fake legal representation, I'm going to tell you a story about what we have seen before, when we call these people the Republic of Texas people. There is a belief by a number of people in Texas that they are not citizens of the United States. They are not citizens of anything but the Republic of Texas, not the state of Texas, the Republic of Texas. And so there was this one fellow who was telling people that he was a lawyer in the Republic of Texas. And his followers liked that whole, rebelliousness. We don't belong to the United States, and you can't tax us, which is also a big deal. They don't want to pay taxes. And the fellow, we had a hearing, we filed suit against him, and he shows up in court. And I swear to God, he looked like Moses. He was wearing robes made out of some sort of cotton fabric that was, looked beaten and tattered. He had a staff. He was wearing sandals. He had a beard, long hair. He just looked like Moses. He had a whole entourage of followers. And so he was somehow mixing in some sort of religiousness and the rebelliousness of this Republic of Texas. We had a hearing, and the judge was very nervous about all these people there and this weird figure. But she got extra security, bailiffs. We got it under control. Nobody misbehaved. The judge granted a judgment in our favor, and we ended up continuing to litigate with our Moses for years, trying to keep him from doing that. Had to file contempt proceedings against him, but we never let it go, and ultimately we stopped him from doing it. I tell you, some of our cases are interesting, and that was a fun one because we got to litigate against a today version of Moses. All right, how do you not get scammed by these people? Do your homework. You've got to do your research on the internet, ask for references. If it's available, speak to a former client. Try to get multiple sources of information, and then, of course, fall back on mother's rule. If it's too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. If they're offering you a guaranteed result, low pricing, cash only transactions, don't take a check, then those are the things that you should just stop and talk to a lawyer. There are numerous sources of lawyers. I know, that I've started this by saying it's so expensive nowadays, but the bar associations have referral services that can refer people that need a lawyer. They can refer them to somebody who takes cases that others wouldn't. There are organizations in all cities that provide free legal services. For example, in Dallas, we have the North Texas Legal Services Organization that provides legal services to indigent people. So you have to make a showing that you're indigent, but that's available. And then, frankly, you can always look around. There are many, many lawyers in the state of Texas, and many good ones that are practicing law at more reasonable rates. Also, the bigger the city, the higher the rate. The smaller the city, the lower the rate. So many times you can go to a lawyer in a suburb or even a small town not too far from wherever this legal matter is, and you can get a more affordable rate from the lawyer. So whether that be just trying to get the best rate, or you don't have any money, you need a lawyer, you can get it through the Bar Association's referrals and the free legal services that are available. What do you do if you think that you've been subjected to the unauthorized practice of law? The first thing I'd recommend would be that the person contact the Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee at www.txuplc.org. This will give you information about what is the unauthorized practice of law. It'll give you links to statutes and cases. It will also tell you, it'll give you a link so that you can fill out a form and make your complaint online. That's been available for 15 years now, and that's our preferred means of getting it. We receive it from that, and then it goes out and gets assigned immediately. You can upload documents through that link, and I'd suggest that's where everybody go. If it involves consumer fraud, you can make a complaint to the Texas Attorney General. So I would go to the Consumer Fraud Division. If it involves interstate commerce, you can make a complaint to the Federal Trade Commission. If it involves immigration, UPL. In addition to the UPL committee, you can also make a complaint to ICE or to the U.S. Attorney's Office locally. If you think somebody's engaged in the unauthorized practice of law and it's a crime, like settling personal injury claims, falsely holding someone out as a lawyer for economic benefit, you can go to the DA's office and file a complaint. They will prosecute those complaints. So keep documents from everything, and then at the end of the day, go to a lawyer. If you want to get good legal advice, you go to a lawyer. If you wanted to get brain surgery, you wouldn't go ask your neighbor or your friend how to do brain surgery. The law is a complex thing, and you really need to focus on the best source of information. And as I said, there's plenty of lawyers out there. Rates are negotiable. If you don't like the rate, you don't like the lawyer, go to somebody else. I've got a little more information I want to share with you. I know we've been going for about 50 minutes now, but I want to tell you a little bit about the UPL committee, and then we're going to reserve some time for questions. Before I move on, though, I've been monopolizing all the time, and Janet Diaz has been very, very quiet. Janet is a big asset to our committee because, as I said earlier, she brings us that non-lawyer point of view. And we have state committee meetings 4 times a year where we have presentations to us on the request for suit authority. Before anybody ever gets sued by the UPL committee, these 9 members have to hear the presentation, see the evidence, and decide by a majority vote whether or not it's worth it for us to file suit. We're trying to make a decision based on whether or not we have a good case, right? And so we really want to know, is this the unauthorized practice of law? And then how current is this? I mean, if this is not still going on, we may not want to dedicate our time and resources to a lawsuit. We prefer to stop something that's still going on because that's what we're about, eliminating the unauthorized practice of law. And at the end of the day, we have one final test. Is this lawsuit in the public interest? And so I would ask Janet if you could just talk a little bit about, how the UPL committee goes about measuring and protecting the public interest through this deliberative process.
Yeah, thanks, Leland. And as a non-lawyer on the state committee, and there's 2 other non-lawyers of the 9 committee members, we have an opportunity to listen from the investigators and or the potential litigators in a particular case. So what happens when a complaint comes into UPL, then it goes through a process. The complaint will be first viewed by a staff member that we have with the State Bar of Texas, and then determine whether or not this particular individual is a lawyer or not a lawyer. So that's the first line of action that is taken. Once it's determined that the complaint is made against an individual who is not a lawyer, then it is assigned to one of our volunteer investigators. We have roughly 190 volunteers throughout the state of Texas. And it's important to point out that UPL, the committee, is comprised of all volunteers. We roughly have about 400 open cases of unauthorized practice of law. So it's a pretty daunting task for our 190 volunteers. But it is assigned to one of the volunteers. A volunteer will then investigate, reach out to the complainant, and then reach out to the individual who's being complained upon and investigate what has transpired, and talk to individuals. It may be that it's appropriate to set up a meeting with an individual to get more information about what has transpired. And ultimately, after an investigative period, it is then determined that this is not UPL, and then the case is closed, or it is determined that there is UPL going on. So then what happens at that point is the individual is asked to cease and desist in that type of action. And either they agree or don't agree at that point. And if they do not agree, then it goes to the next step, which is the litigation or a request for suit authority. So as a committee member at those quarterly meetings, I sit and listen to the outcome of the investigation, and then hear the reasons why that an individual is now seeking suit authority. So then they give the background of the information and the legal aspects. During those meetings, it's pretty fascinating because we're hearing this information for the first time on that particular complaint. And oftentimes I have my computer in front of me, and I too am pulling up the Facebook site that this individual may possess. I can do some investigation with my computer as I'm listening to the request for suit authority on, different clients that maybe they've had because they post things on Facebook. There's a lot of background information that you can determine while we're sitting in those meetings, but it's fascinating to hear how the public is being harmed and how egregious that some of these non-lawyers pretending to be either lawyers, or as Leland said, they may be saying, I am not a lawyer, but yet their actions say otherwise. So it's during that time that we, based on the information that is presented to us, we either agree that we believe that unauthorized practice of law is happening and that a suit is necessary to stop that individual from continuing their action. So that's what happens during a committee meeting.
So I think that was a very good explanation of the process that we follow. Like Janet indicated, these meetings occur 4 times a year, and they're typically located in different parts of the state. We try to rotate around the state because I mean, we're covering from Brownsville to Sherman, from El Paso to Texarkana. And so we move these meetings around in order so that the local members of the subcommittee can attend these meetings, and so that we get sort of the viewpoints of that area of the state. We have subcommittees that handle all these complaints that are located all across the state, and we rely upon, as Janet indicated, volunteers. We only have one paid person, and that's an assistant that's provided to us by a branch of the Supreme Court, and that person's in Austin. That's the person that receives the complaints through the portal, through the website, assigns them out, and sort of monitors our case management system. But the real work and the real footsteps on the ground are by the members of the local subcommittees. They're the ones that are doing the investigations. They're doing the meetings. They're doing the letter writing, the calling, witness talking, and getting the cases ready to be, have a vote on it at the subcommittee level. So the subcommittees, manned by volunteers, have to first take a vote. Maybe they decide, we don't think this is the unauthorized practice of law. Let's close the file. They might decide, we think it is, but we think it's over. Close the file. We think it is, but the person seems to be willing to stop doing it just based on a cease and desist letter. Get the letter, close the file. Or then we have the few where they are recalcitrant, they're not going to stop, and this is a threat to the public that will continue and it needs to be stopped. That's the one that the subcommittee would vote and say, let's do something about it. Let's recommend to the state that the state committee file a lawsuit. Then when we do file a lawsuit, we have to go find a volunteer. This is one of the best bargains in the state of Texas in terms of, how efficient we are. Our total budget for all of our expenses for the whole year is $170,000. And most of that is spent on supplies and the cost of meetings. So with 170,000 and the free time of all these volunteers, we're able to do all this very important work. Now, Janet has another very important role besides being one of our lay members on the state committee, and that is she is our recruiting coordinator for our committee. And we are always looking for members to join our cause, whether they be lawyers or non-lawyers. We have non-lawyers doing the investigations. Obviously, only lawyers can file the lawsuits, but so a number of our members are non-lawyers. We also are recruiting our lawyers to join us, and normally our time commitment is, attend a meeting once a month or a quarter, depending on if you're in a rural area, probably more like quarterly. If you're in a big city, more like monthly, for about 1 hour. And then maybe 2 or 3 more hours during the month, sending a few letters, responding, and getting ready for the next meeting so you can report on what's the status of whatever complaints that you're investigating, which are normally more like 2 or 3 complaints at a time. So Janet, anything else you want to say about recruiting? Now's your pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is geared towards Houston area, we have a huge need in the Houston area for investigators. We have roughly 170 open cases in the Houston area, and we've got about 15 active members right now in the area, and that's just not a sufficient number to be able to investigate these types of cases. So I would say this is a great opportunity in your churches, in your other corporate networking opportunities to get the word out about UPL, that it's here, that it exists, and anybody who has an interest or likes to be a sleuth, or everybody likes their crime dramas. But the point there is we like to investigate things. We like to try and figure out and solve puzzles. This is a great a way to give back to the community, help some people out. If you like to do investigative work, make some phone calls, interested in getting involved in this type of initiative. We do training. There are those opportunities available to new investigators. So I just wanted to mention that we do have a need specifically in the Houston area and always looking for people to get involved. And we've got a slide at the end that will tell you just exactly how to do that.
Okay, I think I have about 5 more minutes before we plan on breaking to take some questions. So I'm going to run quickly through a few more of my PowerPoint slides and try to highlight some of the things that I think could be helpful in just understanding the UPL committee and its process. As far as the history of the UPL committee, it's amazing. It goes back to 1932 when the original Texas Bar Association created a committee on lay and corporate encroachment on the practice of law. At that point, all complaints were being funneled through the bar associations, and so the Texas Bar set up this committee to try to consolidate and coordinate a little bit. Over the years, it's gone from being a state bar committee to a Supreme Court committee, and that happened in 1952 when it got shifted into the Supreme Court. And we have the current iteration of the UPL committee today as being a judicial agency of the Texas Supreme Court. We've said a few times we've got 9 members on the state committee, 6 of which are lawyers, 3 of which are non-lawyers. We've got 17 subcommittees and about 190 volunteers throughout Texas. We break them up into districts. Houston, where this speech is directed, is in District 4. Let's see. Let's talk about the complaint process. I think that'd be more interesting right now. We get a complaint in, as indicated on screen at the website. Then the complaint is assigned out to a local subcommittee. The subcommittee chair then assigns that out to one of the volunteer members. Then a notice letter is sent to the respondent saying, hey, we've received information that you've engaged in the unauthorized practice of law. We'd appreciate a response. They typically will respond, and they'll either tell us, maybe this is a one-off deal, or they'll tell us to stick it, and I'm not stopping what I'm doing. We then, after we get the response to that complaint, we do more investigation, talking to witnesses. And then there's a deliberative process that occurs at the subcommittee level. So in terms of, a very democratic process, it really is a democracy because it requires first the subcommittee must consider this and vote on it, a majority vote rule. And then if it requires litigation, it goes up to the state committee. And again, the majority rules. So there are 2 levels of review, the subcommittee review and the state committee review. The processes are, if the subcommittee thinks there's insufficient evidence, we just close the investigation. If we think there's sufficient evidence, but it doesn't require suit because we think the person will honor a cease and desist agreement, then we go to step 2, that's the cease and desist agreement, and then we close the investigation. If we think the person is engaged in the unauthorized practice of law and we need more information, or we want to, maybe go to the next step, we almost always give an opportunity for that person to appear before the whole subcommittee and say their piece. So we schedule an investigative hearing, and then the investigator will ask a few questions. We'll offer the respondent the opportunity to make any statement they want, anything that could influence the subcommittee's decision-making process. And once that process is completed, then we have a meeting. We conduct a vote. If there's a motion to request suit authority, if it passes, it goes to the state committee for deliberation. If it fails, then normally it's simply closed at that point. And I can tell you from 30 years of experience, This is not a rubber stamp process at either level. This is a hard review. We reject cases, and it's sometimes disappointing for our investigators or our subcommittee chairs. They put a lot of time into it, but if we don't think it's a good case, we're not going to prosecute it. When the UPL committee's state committee authorizes a suit after their quarterly meeting, then it's assigned back to the subcommittee. The subcommittee then assigns it to a local litigator, normally a member of the subcommittee. Sometimes we farm it out to a special counsel that we might appoint. Again, amazingly, all this is being done without any legal fees being charged to anybody. So there's a huge contribution by the members of the UPL committee to this process. And the litigation process is even a bigger contribution because it takes time to go through the legal system. Let's see. I would make another point. Through trial and error and through wins and losses, we have defined exactly what it is we seek when we go to court. We only seek injunctive relief. Some people might say, well, what about my money? Can I get my money back? Nope. We're not about getting your money back. We're about stopping this from happening again. And if somebody wants to get their money back, they'll have to hire their own lawyer because we don't actually represent the complainant. We represent the interests of the state of Texas. And the interest of the state of Texas is not having the unauthorized practice of law go on. Some states, there is actual authority, like a statute that authorizes recovery of the monies that have been paid, the fees that have been paid. That's a matter that will have to be taken up with the Texas legislature. For now, that authority does not exist. And our committee tries to stick very, very closely to our statutory charge because we don't want to get ourselves into a lawsuit where somebody thinks we tried to take advantage. We tried to go beyond our charge. So we keep it limited to seeking injunctive relief. We don't even seek recovery of attorney's fees. And most of the time, there are no attorney's fees. All right. Sometimes when people come to the UPL committee, they will ask us, what the law is. Can I do this? Can I do that? Sometimes lawyers say, hey, can I do this without engaging in the unauthorized practice of law and putting my license in jeopardy? Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has adopted rules for the UPL committee, and one of those rules is that we cannot give advisory opinions. And the reason why we can't give advisory opinions is because we are a judicial agency and therefore an extension of the courts. And the courts cannot give advisory opinions, and neither can we. So that's an important thing that people just can't come to the UPL committee and say, I'd like to get your blessing to what my new business model is. Can't give it. Okay. This is a page that will, if you want to take down some information, this will help you with websites where you can go for example, attorney referrals. The Houston Bar Association has a legal line where you can call that number and try to get legal questions answered. The Consumer Protection Division of the Texas Attorney General's Office can sometimes help with UPL complaints. And then I would say there are a number of other sources available on the internet. For example, North Texas Legal Services. I think there's an East Texas Legal Services as well, where you can get free or discounted legal services. So I hope that through all of this, we have provided you with, a lot of information that will make you smarter about what is UPL, how to recognize it, how to avoid it, how not to get scammed, how to tell other people how to avoid it and how not to get scammed, where to go, including ultimately, the last slide is the first page of our website. If you'll see here on the menu bar along the top, we've got the FAQs, which are frequently asked questions. That provides a lot of good information, including links to statutes and cases. We have the committee roster. You can see who is on the committee. You can see who are the chairs of the subcommittees and what are the subcommittees. News, recent developments involving UPL. the complaint form. Click this. This is the best way to make the complaint. And then you could send an email to us just by clicking on the contact us. So this website right here, txuplc.org, info@txuplc.org, is the best portal to get into the UPL committee and get your questions answered. With that, I want to thank our moderators for hosting this, for giving us an opportunity to speak to you today. I want to thank Janet Diaz for joining me today and presenting this information we hope has been helpful to you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you. Janet, is this the page or the email that someone, when you were talking about that you need volunteers or people to contact you, is this the email address?
The info, the
Okay.
info at txuplc.org. Yep.
Okay. All right. Got it.
Thank you.
I don't have questions here in the chat. And the other questions that I did have here, you guys actually had already addressed, so I won't read those again. However, I did have a question. In a lot of the Spanish-speaking countries, there's a notario, and then here we have notaries. Do you guys see a lot of times that there's complaints or issues with that language barrier when they're thinking that they're talking to an attorney, as in their Spanish-speaking country, as opposed to a notario? Because I see those signs everywhere about notarios, you know, or what have you, and those aren't actual attorneys, correct?
That's correct. And that's the problem, is that here we have a sign that might say Notary Public. And so that person, the only thing they're going to do for you is they're going to notarize a legal document. Like if you have a deed or some other form of recordable instrument that you have to take to the real property records and file, it's got to be, you know, notarized or acknowledged. That's all that they do. A will. For a will signing, sometimes you have to do that. Some loan documents required to be notarized. But all they're doing is they're saying, this person appeared to me, showed their identification, so I know them to be the person that is indicated. And that provides some reliability that the person signing is the person that's indicated to be signing. That's the value of a notary public in the state of Texas. But in Mexico and other Hispanic countries, the phrase notario publico connotes that you have some legal knowledge and that you can give some legal advice. They're actually not a lawyer, because in most Spanish-speaking countries, lawyers are referred to as abogados. So an abogado is not necessarily a notario publico. But in Hispanic countries, people do go to notario publicos for legal matters many times before they go to the abogado.
So there's a lot of confusion, you know, in the Houston area, throughout Texas, from individuals who are used to that type of representation in the other countries. And then when they come over here, they do not understand that these people are not licensed attorneys. So they shouldn't be giving them legal advice. They shouldn't be completing forms for them. They shouldn't be finding forms and helping individuals fill those out, those types of things. But oftentimes our complaints do include individuals that are doing just exactly that type of work.
Okay. When you said that that you guys don't, your job is basically to stop unauthorized practice of the law. You're representing the interests of the state of Texas. If you've got and I don't want to just pick on notarios or whatever, when you see these signs out there and you see that there's somebody that's charging people to do these signs, to do documents, to help with immigration, blah, 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 or whatever, and they've scammed these people out of money. In the event that you all are able to get this business, you know, to stop doing what they're doing, to whatever judgment or whatever that comes from that, are people able to get that to file like a civil suit against the person that has scammed them out of their money, that they can, you know, potentially get some of their money back?
So the people that are taken advantage of, they do have their own personal claims to recover their money. They, however, and just to be blunt about it, they don't frequently assert those claims
Mhm.
because they don't have more money. I mean, they gave that person the money, they blew it. There's no more money, so there's no money to hire a lawyer to go file that claim. You know, complete relief that would protect the public would require there be legislation enacted in Texas that would authorize recovery of money. The problem with doing that, though, is that it would probably have to be shifted into another branch of the government. For example, the Attorney General's office might be able to undertake that. The Attorney General's office will sometimes work in tandem with us. You know, normally when we have our quarterly meetings, we have representatives of the different branches of government attend our meetings, including a representative of the Attorney General. The reason for that is to make sure that we're not doing something that they're doing, and they're not doing something that we're doing, that we're not, you know, duplicating our efforts, or maybe they know something about, you know, somebody that person's on their radar, so then they share the information with us, or we share the information with them, and but they have a broader authority under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act to sue to recover monies on behalf of injured consumers. Our charge is simply to eliminate the unauthorized practice of law through injunctions.
Okay. Another question that I have, and as you guys are talking, these questions kind of pop into my head. So considering that we, as a collective, a collaborative, a month of service and all of our partners, there are legal service organizations that that provide us with our workshops, with our documents, with forms and things like that. Especially as it relates to estate planning documents, wills, transfer on death deeds. They prepare documents that we can distribute with instructions of how to get it completed and so on and so forth, just to make sure that we're not doing unauthorized practice of law here. When we distribute those documents, when someone says, hey, I missed this particular workshop, can you send me the forms or whatever? Are we within our boundaries to distribute those forms because they were provided by the attorney organizations and provided with instructions, or does there need to be some kind of a disclaimer or something that says, you know, we are not attorneys, we recommend you, blah, 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 kind of thing?
So Nia, you're taking me straight back to one of the points that I made earlier, that the UPL committee can't give advisory opinions.
Okay.
It's frustrating. And so after getting questions like this for, you know, the whole 30 years I've been doing this, I figured out a way to say something that makes the person asking the question feel better, instead of me just, you know, totally giving them a stiff hand and not answering anything. And what I try to do is point people to the authority and then talk about historic practices,
Okay.
not like, are you okay? So the point you to the authority would be, you know, we had a slide. Let's see if I can get to it.
Yeah,
This thing right here.
Okay.
So this one is the one that says what is not the practice of law. And it is the publication through written materials, forms, see forms specifically. And if the products clearly and conspicuously state that the products are not a substitute for the advice of an attorney. If some organization drafted that for you and provided some instructions, it is likely that that statement is somewhere on that document.
Okay.
If it's not on that document, it probably should be on that document. So you might want to screenshot my screen here, or write down 81.101C, and then go grab that language if it's not in there. You know, you'll see it if you start paying. It's kind of like if somebody said, "Hey, I'm looking for a purple Dodge Challenger," right? And there are no purple Dodge Challengers. The minute you say that, you're going to start seeing purple Dodge Challengers everywhere. You'll see this statement if you look. So I would suggest to you that this statute can provide you some guidance. And then also, historically, if the forms are being distributed as forms and not in, like, this is the right form for your problem. It's just like I have various forms. And here's some divorce forms. You're getting a divorce. I got some divorce forms, but not saying this is the right form for you, because there could be multiple forms.
Multiple.
This petition, this waiver, that waiver. And say, here's my forms. You pick what you want. Well, then, historically, we haven't gone after that as a UPO committee because that is more in the nature of this thing of providing general information. For example, if somebody has a meeting at the Elks Lodge and talks about trusts, okay, that's instructional until the person says, wait, I have 2 children and I have 2 properties. What kind of trust do I need? If they answer that question, now we're applying the law to your particular facts. Remember, the facts and the law and making important decisions, now we're applying that. So in that situation, that person would probably be practicing law. But if all you're doing is saying, look, I've got some forms, I've got some general information, here you go. We have not targeted that. We have not authorized suit against those kinds of scenarios.
Gotcha. All right. Point noted. All right. Let's see what else we got here. I see we got a couple of our regulars here. Miss Foreman, were there any questions? Miss Smith, did you guys have any questions directly of the presenters for you today?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for your time today. Great information.
Thank you. All right, and I don't see any that are on Facebook or anything here either. Oh, the one slide that you had with the links or the different resources, there are a few of those that I don't have. Would you guys be able to send me those so that I can include that as well?
Yes, I will send that to you, Nia.
Okay, all right, and I'll make sure that that gets included along with that other flyer that you provided for me. With that being said, thank y'all very much. A lot of great information, a lot of useful information, and hopefully those folks that are joining can utilize the services or the information that you provided here, or at least provide it and kind of share it and pay it forward to someone else that may, because I'm pretty sure that somebody knows somebody that has gotten unauthorized practice of law or legal advice from somebody that was not a practicing attorney. So thank y'all very much. And even going over the process of how to file the complaints and what that actually looks like as well. So thank y'all very much. Ms. Janet, Mr. Leland, thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to be here this afternoon. We really appreciate it on behalf of the A Month of Service partners and all of the collaborators involved. We appreciate you. We thank all of our participants for joining us and for viewing the presentation. What do we have that's coming up this week? Let's see. Part 2, we have part 2 of our clearing title and probate concerns that's going to be provided by the Texas Legal Services Center. That's coming up on Thursday. Next week, we have the evictions presentation, maintaining and adding value to your home. That's coming up next week. I will include our schedule along with the other information here as well of other workshops that we've got that are coming up, and for you all to be able to go in and to register for that as well. That being said, you all have a wonderful remainder of your afternoon. Protect yourselves, stay safe. As of right now, the storm is moving east. There's no telling if it's going to double back, and we just never know with what goes on down here in the Gulf. We got some strange things happen these days. So in that regards, better to be safe and sorry. You guys take care of yourselves. Look out for your neighbors. Look out for your loved ones. You all stay safe, and we will see y'all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.